Get 5 coffins ready.
Hey everyone, welcome to my guide for Medusa. Medusa is a solid ability-based hunter who is good in both the ADC and the mid lane role. She's good in both roles because she presents the same risks to each role that she does the benefits, but right now mid lane is a little preferred. So let's get her builds out of the way. Realistically, she can go either a basic ability damage build or the basic attack damage build and do it just fine, and this goes for either role. It's really just down to preference. Personally, I go the ability-based damage one since Medusa can't really keep up with the meta hunters or, god forbid, the mage ADCs, basic attack for basic attack, so why not just focus on her strength? But again, nothing wrong with going the more traditional hunter build. Relics wise, you really just need beats and Aegis. There's no real wiggle room there. Then with the shard, it's just again wing shard. It's so good for any basic attack based god. So let's get to her passive. It's not really much of a passive. Medusa has no basic attack movement penalty when strafing side to side and half the normal penalty when moving directly backwards. You want to try to kite whenever you can on any hunter, backpedaling and weaving back and forth unpredictably to make yourself harder to hit. And Medusa is simply the best hunter in the game at this thanks to the passive. So if you're looking to practice kiting, Medusa is a good place to start since she gives you a little wiggle room. Get it? Because she's a snake. Really what we should do now is introduce Medusa's stim ability, which works directly with the passive. In Medusa's first ability, she primes 4 serpents. Now, her next 4 basic attacks will have a significant basic attack stim on them, and release a serpent, which will deal damage over time to the affected target. These basic attacks still function as a normal basic attack would, but the ability has no duration on it, so you can prime these basic attacks and hold on to it. That's an option in very niche scenarios, but as I'm sure you can already tell, this is a very potent hunter stim with just as many downsides as it has upsides. The main 2 issues with this are, 1, it is able to be body blocked by say minions or just plain the enemy support walking in front of your shots, and the fact that since it has a very limited number of basic attacks rather than a duration, it is very easy to lose effectiveness on this ability if any shots are missed and or blocked. And worst of all, if you pop this ability expecting to fight, but then the enemy backs off, you have to blow this ability on the wave since you need to basic attack the wave in the early and mid game to clear it. And now you can't fight because your very potent stim is now down. So if you want to keep up with other hunters while fighting, you really need to play around this ability and make sure you can plunge all 4 basic attacks into one target. That said though, the damage overall even in the early game is mighty. So, like with a regular hunter, even if you end up hitting a tank, it's really best to try and focus your damage on one single target. Medusa has other abilities which easily enable her to plow all 4 basic attacks into one enemy. But first let's get to her wave clear, one of the more unique ones in the game. In Medusa's second ability, she fires a thin projectile which stops on the first enemy or wall hit. When it hits a geographical wall, nothing will happen, but if it hits an enemy minion or god, or even a pet like a Vulcan turret, tower bastion, etc., it will fire a wide cone AoE behind whatever it hit, and any enemies hit by the original projectile or the cone will be damaged, well, duh, and have their healing reduced for 5 seconds. The general rule of thumb is that anything considered a structure, even if you can hit it with basic attacks like Terra 3, cannot be hit with this ability. But things that can be damaged by abilities such as the tower bastions still can be even though they're still technically a structure. But back to the more common uses of the ability. Obviously, to clear waves, use it at a slight angle either to the right or leftmost melee minion and there you have it. But there's so much more to come out of this ability, right? Well, on paper, yes. It should be one of the best poke and zone control tools in the game given the sheer size of the spray. But everyone knows about the acid spray and where Medusa will need to be to use it on them, since she just kinda stands parallel to you. So they will play around you if you try to go for something a little more fancy. So a general rule of thumb with this ability during the laning phase would be go for poke when you think you can, but always prioritize the wave being cleared. Because as we saw with her first ability's damage, she is still more than capable of taking good trades even without this ability. Which brings us to the next point, using this ability outside of the laning phase. Well, as I've hinted at, Medusa's next ability and ultimate will be the ones that very easily set her up for this ability, because frankly, hitting it raw isn't easy. It's a pretty thin projectile, and frankly, the damage falls off very hard in the late game, so it's really best to follow those abilities up with your basic attack in 2 anyways, especially considering your first ability works directly off of basic attacks. So let's stop beating around the bush and talk about Medusa's third ability. Medusa dashes forward. This dash will go through minions but will stop when the first enemy got hit. And Medusa is immune to knockbacks for the duration. When Medusa stops on an enemy god, she will deal damage to them and root them for a fraction of a second. So this ability, when used aggressively anyways, is the enabler of Medusa's first ability damage as well as making her second ability easier to hit since, well, you're closer now. And in more niche situations when you're closer up to them already, this ends up being an insanely good basic attack answer. Naturally, this is Medusa's only movement ability though, so you have to be very decisive with when you use it. Dashing in every time you get in range or your support hits some CC on someone is just going to get you killed, either by the enemy duo or the enemy jungler noticing you're dashing off cooldown. That said though, when you know the coast is clear and you have a good chance of winning trades, using this ability as a sort of secondary engage with your support in lane is more than fair. And just to trunk out enemies by using your 1 and dashing on them when they get too close is fair too. Clearly though, you can't do this against every duo lane and certainly not with any support god on your side. It's going to take some time to learn both which supports on your side can enable aggression and which enemy duo lanes are actually weak enough for you to do this. Despite the risks, it's fairly easy to completely annihilate someone with your dash into your 1, into your 2. So if you're playing Medusa in the mid lane or just happen to catch someone in the jungle in either role, never forget just how much all 3 of Medusa's core abilities together is capable of. That said though, as the game gets later, this is no longer an option really outside of finishing someone off because your team wins the late game team fight. Typically this ability is relegated to a pure escape ability, and it's not the best for that. You could make the case that it's better than nothing, but sometimes it isn't even worth calling it that. The ability, as I'm sure you can tell, is easily body blocked, so all the enemy team has to do, or the enemy jungler ganking you specifically, is just body block where you want to dash as Medusa, and you can't really do anything, like at all. This is worsened in the jungle against Guardians since their hitboxes tend to be bigger. It can be almost impossible to squeeze past, say, a Ymir with this ability. So while it's an awesome tool to use aggressively, it's sort of a catch-22 where you want to get in range and dash on people and poke out with your second ability, but you can't walk up too far without the risk of this dash getting easily body blocked. Again though, when you are able to catch someone, it's almost always a guaranteed half health on that target, if not 2/3 of their health gone. And lucky for Medusa, her ult allows her to wipe out the rest of that health right off, and then some. Medusa becomes CC immune and winds up, firing in a cone AoE which does not pierce walls. Enemies who are looking directly or to the side of Medusa will take full damage and are stunned, and enemies who are looking directly or at least mostly away from Medusa will take half damage but luckily are still heavily slowed. Enemies killed by this ability, or who die when they are stunned by this ability, are turned into a permanent statue. And let's get it out of the way, these statues don't do much, but Medusa is able to use your second ability off of it. Does it come up very much? No, not really. You can ignore the statues almost 100% of the time. Back to the ability. First off, the ability is much bigger than most people give it credit for. You really don't have to be very far up at all to use it, which is a common issue shared among Medusa's other abilities. All things considered, it's a very simple ability, but like with Baron's ultimate last week, don't try to force that big stun out every time. If you Medusa ultimate 3 people during a team fight, or Medusa ultimate your lane opponent in 1v1 situation, and you don't get the stun, so what? You're still getting a smattering of damage with a big slow on them, and the ability is still completely effective when used this way. Speaking of which, again like Baron ult, Medusa ultimate forces the enemy team to make some moves. Nobody wants to get hit by this stun, and as the game gets later, no god in the game can face tank all that damage, and the flurry of basic attacks sure to come after. So you can also use it as a sort of self-peel options for you and your team, and once you get more accustomed to the timing of the initial windup, while escaping you can pretty easily 180 with the ultimate for again some pretty nasty self-peel. Speaking of self-peel though, don't forget that this is another example of an instant CC immune ultimate, so you can bait enemies into diving too deep, and when they're about to CC you, pop the ultimate and watch them scurry. There's a similar idea when it comes to big pieces of CC coming at you. So long as you react in time, you can immune literally anything in the game, so in some situations, it's like having another set of purification beads. That's more when you're on the back foot. When it comes to playing on the front foot, the ability is even easier. When you're really crushing a matchup, it's a fantastic finisher or starter, keeping in mind that the slow and or stun is perfect to help finish off or begin comboing targets. That takes good decisiveness and matchup knowledge though, so in turn, late game ultimates are actually even easier. Teammates get a good engage, ultimate, catch a squishy target alone, ultimate, and so on. Again, like Baron ultimate, it's an ultimate you really don't want to hesitate with. Just so long as you're not only using it on a tank, it's always a good idea just to throw it out there once any team fight has properly begun. Speaking of using her ultimate, let's get some combos with Medusa. 2, 1, 3 basic attacks. 3, 1 basic attacks, 2. 4 basic, 3 basic, 1 basic attacks, 2. 3, 1 basic attacks, 2 finish with the ultimate. For ability leveling, you want your 2 at level 1, your 3 at level 2, and your 1 at level 3, but I've seen some players get an extra level into their 2 at level 3 instead, and I could see that too. From there you max your 2, your 1, then your 3, leveling the ultimate whenever you can. I like to point skip at level 8 just to make sure my second ability and ultimate stay topped up, but this isn't strictly necessary. Medusa is a god with very clear upsides and very clear downsides, but in her case, she still ends up being somewhere in the middle no matter the match. She's safe enough, but most gods safer than her still deal around the same damage in the late game and can almost always outcarry her. She does decent damage and is safer than the super hard hitting hunters, but those hunters do deal more damage than her. So at this point in her lifetime in Smite, she's really only a god you play because you want to play her. But there's still absolutely nothing wrong with that. She's insanely fun, easily one of the most fun hunters in the game, and her aggression in lane, so long as you don't get ganked every 5 seconds, is extremely effective, especially if you've got a friend in comms with you in the duo lane. She's not going to be a home run kind of god where you start winning every match just because you learned Medusa, but regardless of whether you win or lose, you'll be having more fun doing it on Medusa. That's all I have on her for now. Thanks for watching.